so concentrated, must be disintegrated. So I know that I'll be walking out again. Yes, I know that I'll be walking out again.
Yeah, and the idea of one guy trying to fight off a system could never be more of an appropriate subject for his next film, which turned out to be his take on Franz Kafka's The Trial in 1962. It's about a man named Josef K who finds himself awoken by authorities in his room who tell him he's under suspicion, but then they don't identify themselves, and they start casting accusations and aspersions at his every move and statement that he makes. K's attempt to get, justice or solace or even, answers to his plight just get him sinking into a nightmare world of bureaucracy and oppression. This film, for me, is one of a pure versions of a nightmare world of bureaucracy. This is a case where I find that Welles just goes all out in saying what's going to be the most horrific, most oppressive, most stark, and most dehumanizing shot by shot by shot that you can make. And, oh my God, he does this to such brilliant effect.
Even though we keep repeating how visually stunning these films are, it's worth noting that they tend to be visually stunning in different ways. So
very good
this
point.
is a film that deals with a lot of contrast, a lot of interesting use of open space, almost looking like the kind of invented environment that Tati's PlayTime set up.
Oh my God, that's so true. That's so true. Look at look at the open space just in the first 15 minutes where the police or those quote unquote authorities are interrogating him. To me, it's like Jacques Tati's bedroom farce of oppressive investigation, because you're framed from his bed, and at any moment a policeman can show up from the left door, the right door, the kitchen in the background, and to just ask an inappropriate question.
Right. If characters were distorted in Touch of Evil, here it's the sets, it's the environments that are distorted, and every room is either too big or too small. Visually, nothing looks right. And where Touch of Evil provided this immediately accessible and effective sense of horror based on its noir elements, here we're kind of left floating due to the Kafka adaptation, due to the fact that there just are no answers, that we're left as confused as the main character.
Yeah, when things need to be big, such as Joseph K's office, it's this epic, gigantic warehouse with hundreds and hundreds of desks. But when he's interrogated, they go to a room which is too small for two people, and yet there's four people in there already, and done with a balancing light, echoing how Psycho used a light to just illuminate the features, but only temporary, because that's the only light in this area on the side of an incredibly bright white office environment.
And as we mentioned earlier in the context of Touch of Evil, Welles seems to be flirting with Hitchcock's Psycho both before and after, because here you have the performance of Anthony Perkins, who, while not a malevolent character as far as we know, is just as twitchy, just as guilty acting as Norman Bates. So a lot of those performance elements we became familiar with in Psycho, he continues here in a different context.
Yeah, that's true. And that's one place where I think the movie falls short for me, especially in comparison to the visuals. I mean, I guess in a way it does fit, because who wouldn't be a twitchy mess in this world? But with Perkins, like, I think you made a really cool point about like how he's a guy who, even doing normal things, just looks like a guy who knows he's guilty of something. So in that way, he is kind of a perfect fit for the sensibility that Kafka wants to put in the story. However, what he isn't to me is really a good actor more than somebody who plays the embodiment of being a twitchy guy. You know, like, he can't help but be twitchy even while doing normal things that no one should be really twitchy about. With two notable exceptions, I find Perkins relies on his affectations too much. Most representative in his attempts to sort of seduce the neighboring women in his apartment complex, played by Jean Moreau.
And is he seducing or being seduced? Because one of the stranger themes of this film is that being accused apparently makes him very desirable to women. So he has a lot of awkward love scenes going on here, and they're just as confusing as everything else.
Yeah, and this is a movie and a subject which is about people who don't really have emotional connections. There's just kind of these things that people want from others, and even affection becomes this kind of bizarre commodity that is something to be used and abused. And the atmosphere just makes a total mockery of concepts of loyalty and honor and principle. It just, everything is up for grabs, and there is nothing stopping the whims of fortune of affecting you one way or the other.
Right. Even family is something that seems to have no familiar meaning here. When a cousin shows up, you can in no way tell how close they are, what they think of each other. And he has an equally ambiguous reaction to his Uncle Max coming in and trying to quote-unquote help.
Max has all these ideas for how Josef K can extricate him from his situation. He's sort of this guide through this nightmare world for a person in Perkins who has already shown incapable of figuring out how he's gets out of this horrific situation. And part of Max's idea is to give him an advocate, and that leads him to Master Advocate Haster, who's played by Welles himself, and actually one of the best entrances of all time, where he's like a hidden figure for a moment until he appears from a bath or something, which causes smoke to literally be emerging from his head.
Welles is the master of the great entrance. He does this every time. And here he plays this character that is just sloth personified.
Yes.
He cannot be bothered with anything he's in. And of course, he never actually helps anyone with their case. That would be far beyond what he considers his problem.
Yeah. And in the physical manifestation of the absurdity of the trial sequence from the lady from Shanghai, this environment cannot be more dilapidated, right down to the point that there's like a seduction scene on a pile of abandoned law books, this monstrous pile. And this also continues in that there's twisted labyrinth hallways with people who are just sitting on stools next there that will eventually hear Haster's with people who are dutifully sitting on stools who will entertain to get an audience with Wells's Haster character. Will they or won't they?
One thing I think must have attracted him to this project, though, was how he envisioned its opening, which is a parable that Kafka wrote that was not originally included in the book, about the law and about how this door, which Welles shows visually, is closed, but it represents the law, and Anthony Perkins' character cannot enter, but the entrance was created just for him. It's strange. It doesn't really make sense, but on a subconscious level, it does a lot to kind of embody the madness of this world. But the emphasis on the law also, I think, connects this film to A Touch of Evil, which is about police corruption, is about the failure of the law in one context, and now in the trial, we're shown that the law is nothing but a joke that
Yes.
cannot be applied in any real way.
Mm-hmm. And this is a case where, like, you could almost say the different scenes are episodic in a similar kind of thing that you could say for Arcaden, in the sense that each scene kind of has its own environment. But once again, as in On Touch of Evil, those environments match. You see, just from the way that the police officers keep abusing even the very framing space of the apartment in the beginning, to his vast office with its incredibly microscopic interrogation room, to the dilapidated look at the law in Haster's office, to the area of judgment, which is this vast expanse, which I think was actually an abandoned train station.
Okay.
And just has people just scattered about, just left destitute by the society. And right down to the oppressive outdoor environment, which features these incredibly anonymous square blocks with muddy ditches and dirty roads connecting to it, to the look of the titular trial itself is really great. Ironically, the one thing that comes to mind is harkens to like the Globe Theater that Shakespeare had so many of his plays, because it's so vertical. It almost seems that like Perkins' character has to go up an ascending spiral to just finally reach a door which may or may not lead, which on the one side it's totally desolate, but then you enter it and there's so many people. There's way too many people. And how Perkins has to just assert authority by literally standing on the desk himself to go, because there literally is not enough room for him to make a stand, right?
Right.
Yeah.
So then I think is the visual highlight of the film. He goes to this artist because to have a flattering portrait of himself would apparently do well by him in this trial. And the artist is enclosed in this area with all these children reaching their hands from the outside of the room, seemingly dozens of them.
And like eyes and mouths are like shown through the holes in the boards.
Right. It's a haunting scene, and so haunting, in fact, that it causes Perkins to run away in through this tunnel where the rays of light shine through the wicker. And again, you're just at a moment here where you want to applaud at Wells's mastery of the pure cinema.
That's right, because it's like great nightmare fuel, and yet makes such a wonderful comment on artists and celebrity and fame and the kind of unwanted glances that entails this kind of fame, and the level of pursuit, which is entirely filmed from like a shot of Perkins running towards us, and then this wicker is just pouring behind him pouring to the distance behind him on either side, right? And this brilliance even concludes near the end, after Josef K finds himself in a church, or the last refuge, etc., etc. But then he meets the advocate who's finally stood up one last time, and that parable comes back in an incredibly powerful scene, because how is it shown? As a screen, totally highlighting the very illusory nature that there was this gate where which Josef K could have found the law after all. And as the light plays on it, the artificiality and the transient nature of this concept of the law cannot be, ironically, more clear, you know?
Right, and that brings us to the ending, which I would say is a spoiler, except it's also so abstract that it might not even count as one. But if Joseph K doesn't know what he's on trial for, what he's accused of, he does seem to know what the punishment will be if he loses his trial, which is death. Now, in the book, two men bring him down into a pit, and they can't decide which one is going to kill him, which one is going to stab him, and so they expect him to kill himself. He makes a stand that he will not do this, and so in the book, one of the men just stabs him and kills him. In the film, Welles takes a different tract because he thought that the stabbing scene reminded him a little too much of the Holocaust. And because Kafka was dealing somewhat in Jewish parables, he wanted to get away from that particular vision. And it leads to an ending that I actually think is somewhat of a misstep, because basically dynamite is thrown into the pit and kills Joseph K that way. And it's one of those old-fashioned, sticks of dynamite business. And it felt to me a little anticlimactic compared to what came before.
It does come off as abrupt, but I liked that ending scene when I saw it. And part of that is because that is one of the few times in the movie that Joseph K manages to get a measure of superiority where the system doesn't beat him down, because he is given this knife and the expectation is that he's supposed to go and kill himself, and he refuses and is actually successful at staring down the two men who brought him there. Now, in the book, when he also refuses, but then one of the men proceed to just stab him. But in the movie, he rails against them, and he has a righteous speech saying, no, you guys have to do it. You have to kill me. It's the system that needs to go and dispose of him. And the two men cower in fear because they don't want to go and be the people responsible. I think, in fact, even he says, you have to be responsible. And so they run off and then do this relatively cowardly thing by throwing the dynamite, which then I think even flashes in such a bright way that maybe even makes a weird statement on nuclear annihilation.
Perhaps, and I think everything leading up to the dynamite is really effective. Is the way what you described as his railing against the system. It's just that at the actual moment of explosion, I felt that it looked like kind of something that might happen on an old TV show.
It leads me to wonder, why did Welles show it in this way as opposed to how it's written in Kafka's novel? And ultimately, my personal feeling about it is that, now, Welles is not going to have his character go out like that, that the system might be all against him, but damn it, this guy's going to go down swinging and go down yelling and screaming, and the system's going to have to try to take him down itself, because he is not going to go down quietly.